You can put, you haven't already. Okay, so we're gonna start near the top because it's a continuous. I think we maybe touched on this last week, but we're gonna start from the top so we can have a smooth flowing discussion. Okay, so again, what the Gemara is saying here is that in this Mishnah that we had. The Mishnah lists the four main categories where Oinol does not apply. And among them, of course, are Hegdish, Karka, and a couple more. Psaros. Those are included. What's the fourth one? And Hegdish and Avodim. Okay. And they all stem from almost the same source. But these are the four that the Mishnah says there's no Onah in these categories. So the Gemara asked the question, which we discussed. Amar, Rava, Amar, Rav Chasa, third line from the top. And he says, Ono, Ein Lohem, the boy Rav Amma, Ono, Ein Lohem, Bitl Mekach, Yesh Lohem, or Ein Lohem. So he asked the question that we know there's no Ono. Ono, which we defined as being an overcharge of a sixth, exactly a sixth, and we know that you have to repay and you cannot cancel the loan, the deal. That's I know. What about Bittul Mekach? That's a separate discussion about whether or not if the ono or if the fraud was above a sixth, then we say there's an option, and the aggrieved party can either receive compensation or cancel the deal. There's a lot of cancel the deal. So now that we have these four categories that say there's no ono, does that mean that there's no cancellation of the deal or not? That's the question that Rav Ami asked. Bittul mekach yesh lahem or ein lahem? Is there a bittul mekach because it's egregious to charge not a six? We're talking about maybe 50% or some high number, and that clearly should be something that would vitiate the deal or not? Or do we say that Ono continues? So Amar Rav Nachman, comes Rav Nachman, or the Oma Rav Chasa, and he said that Rav Chasa himself said, Poshet Rav Ami, that this question that Rav Ami asked, he also answered. And what did he say? Ono ein lahem bittul mekach yesh lahem. So he posed the question and then he gave the answer. And he says, no, Ono doesn't apply. That's what the Mishnah is coming to tell us. But it's only ono up to a sixth. Let's go with a sixth. But beyond a sixth, no. Then the laws of Bittul Mekach apply, and that applies even to the four categories that are enunciated in the Mishnah. Okay, so that's open and shut. No, Mekach, Bittul Mekach, yes. Now, Rabbi Yochanan, who was the Gadol Ador, so he took this Mishnah and he was an Amara, and he said, okay, I hear what the Mishnah is saying, but and so he repeated more or less what the Mishnah was saying, and then as a result of what he said, two of the Talmidim then sort of dissected Rabbi Yochanan's view and said, you know what? This doesn't apply to every case of the Mishnah. The Mishnah lists four cases, but it doesn't apply to all of them, meaning that Bittul Mekach. Bittul Mekach is not necessarily across the board, which was what Rabbi Ami said when he gave his pshat. So what does it mean? So we said, okay, so now there's a machlokes in Rabbi Yochanan what he meant to say when he said that what Rav Ami said of Ono Ein of Bittul Mekach Yesh. What does it mean? So this is an important machlokes because this is the jumping off point for the Gemara. Rav Yoina said in Rabbi Yochanan that what he said that there is Bittul Mekach a hegdoshus, that it refers only to hegdish, not the other three categories, but only to hegdish. That by hegdish there's Bittul Mekach. So that was Rabbi Hyatt. Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar, another of his disciples, said, no, akarkos, that he was referring about karka, that there is bittul mekach. Vitravaya, and both of them made Rabbi Yochanan Amru Ano in Ein Lahem Bittul Mekach. In other words, they're pronouncing that there is no Ono, which is what the Mishnah tells us, but that there is Bittul Mekach, but there's now a machlokes whether Bittul Mekach applies to Hegdish or to Karka. The Gemara is going to explain what that means. What's the chilek? I mean, why he says one, he says the other, but what do we interpret from that? So, but there's no question that the other two categories of Adam and Shtaros doesn't even come into the discussion. We're not even raising that there is a question of bittul mekach, of mekach tos, but only in these two there is the possibility of mekach tos. By Shtaros, no. By Avodim, no. Okay. So now the Gemara is going to now give us the interpretation of what this means. So according to Rav Yoina, he says it means hegdish. Manda Omar a hegdoshois. According to Rav Yoina, who said that it refers to hegdish, kolshkein akarkos. Then for sure, karka is included. And you don't have to mention karka because it's understood, and we'll see why in a minute. You know, if you're saying hegdish, there's mekach tos, of course karka. But on the flip side, non the Omer karkos, Rabbi Yirmiyah, who said that Rabbi Yochanan meant that it refers to karka, no, it's not automatic. Why? Kiddush Shmuel. And I think we touched on this last week. It is Shmuel, because Shmuel says the following rule. The Omer Shmuel, Hegdish Shavamana. Let's say we talked about if you have a Hegdish that you purchase for a mana, very nice sheep, let's say, or goat, and it costs a mana, that's what you want to sacrifice to the Beis Hamikdash. Now, the halacha is that once you sanctify an animal, you can't unsanctify. There's no such thing as trading, but you already made it holy. There's one exemption, and that is when the animal has a mum, and you cannot sacrifice it, then you are allowed to trade it for another animal. And then there's a question, what do you do with this animal, not with the first animal? That's not what we're going to delve into. So you trade it for another animal, and that's the one you give the sacrifice. You give the carbon. So now the question is, if he bought the first one for a mana, and then he found another animal, and he only paid a pruta, obviously much less than the first animal, is that okay? Can you pay less to substitute an animal for hegdish? And we can see both sides of the issue. I mean, a carbon is a carbon, an animal is an animal, and you found one and you found another. It doesn't necessarily have to be a lesser animal. Maybe he got a good deal. I mean, whatever. But he wound up paying a lot less than the first one, more than a sixth. Okay, more than a sixth less. So he's paying, I don't know, half the amount, or in the case of a pruta, it's probably a fraction. So, in other words, there may be, at the time that he went to Beis Hamikdash, and people giving animals, we can imagine supply and demand, and the person who owned the animals was standing at the gates of the Beis Hamikdash and waiting for people to buy his animals for korbanos, and no one's buying because everybody has an animal. So when someone says, "Oh, my animal is no good anymore, I need a replacement," he jumps on it. I mean, he'll take any price because when everybody finishes sacrificing, he has nothing to sell anymore. I mean, his animals are all, it's like after the fact.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Lahavdil, yeah, go ahead.
Why should we link the two animals together in any way? If the first one wasn't possible just forget about it. It's off the table. The one that he replaced it with is the one, no matter what it cost, he was still bringing an animal to accomplish the mission. So,
but
why do we care about price?
But
So,
that's the question. The question is he
that's one side of
now
the coin, right?
right? Is he obligated in the value of it, and it's got to be a kosher korban, or is he valued in a kosher korban? I think, to my mind, it might depend on why is he, what's the reason for this korban? I don't know whether this enters into it anywhere or not, but no, if it's a voluntary korban and he's giving something that's valued X, and then there's a move and he has to substitute, you'd argue he's trying to donate this amount, and it should be in the form of korban, and it should be a. But on the other hand, if it's one of these chatas or whatever specific thing where he's obligated to give a sheep or a goat or whatever, it shouldn't matter in the end which one it is, as long as he satisfies what that halacha requires. That's my thought process. I don't know if anybody
Yeah,
talked
so
about
the
that.
Mefarshim don't really segregate and say, depending on what kind of carbon, if it's a carbon oil or a chatas, or whether it's a voluntary carbon. That's not really what the underlying question here is. If you dedicate something to the Ribono Shel Olam, regardless of what it is, no matter whether it's a chiyuv or not a chiyuv, you've now made a pronouncement that this is, you want to, you want to put your best foot forward. So you spend a nice amount of money. It's like buying a lulav and an esrog. I mean, you want it to be hidur, so you spend more money to make it more hidur. Now, all of a sudden, your esrog falls and the pitam breaks. Now what do? So you got to buy a substitute. So now you're already at the point where your beautiful esrog that cost a lot of money is no longer valid. So,
But see, that's different because that esrog was worth $50 when it was in good condition. Without the pitum, you turn it into a fruit to eat. It's
yeah, but
worth
that's the
a
mum. So
dollar.
the pitum is the equivalent of the mum.
Right. No, very much so. But the difference is a sheep that's worth $100 and it has a little moon that pulses it as a korban, it's probably still worth $90 as for the to shear the wool and to eat the and chef didn't have the meat and so on. Whereas because that's what sets the market value of it. Whereas in the case of an esrog, this tiny little thing, how does the pitum, how does that set the market value only as an esrog for the mitzvah
Well,
of lulav and esrog?
why get into all these details? The mission of the Baal is to bring a korban to the Beis Hamikdash, and he tried his best, and it didn't work out with the first one, but he goes on with the mission, and he gets another one.
But he wants to get one.
The details shouldn't matter why it happened.
No, but that's very much the point, Jay, that he has to get, but he doesn't want to lessen the beauty of what he's doing before the Ribono Shel Olam by getting something that I'll just spend a few dollars and I'll get it as a substitute. He really wants to do something equivalent to the first.
But if he can't buy another one at the equivalent quality.
No, he can buy.
Oh, I thought there were no more.
No. He can buy and chooses to buy one that's only a pruta.
Sorry.
Presumably he can buy one for another money. But he said, I spent so much money and it's puzzle. I'm already here. I'll spend a few bucks and I'll get another one. I mean,
he doesn't have the money.
The air is let out of the tire already. He doesn't feel the same.
He has no more money. He has no choice.
Well, that's why I was using the example. With an animal, there are a lot of mums where the mum makes it absolutely puzzle as a korban, but only slightly adjusts the market value of the animal otherwise. As opposed to the esrog with the pitum, where without that pitum, it's the market value of an esrog. It's an edible fruit, and it's worth very little.
But Menashe, I don't think we're looking at the post-mum value to determine whether or not, what its value is. For all we know,
for all we know, the animal fell off a cliff and it's almost dead and it's worth almost nothing because it can't even be shafted, and still the same rules would apply. True.
Right. But also the market value for a carbon versus the market value for shechting an animal for eating could be, oceans apart. You wouldn't spend that kind of money just to shecht an animal to eat it. The market for that is maybe half or less than half. But it's coming to the Ribono Shel Olam. You're coming to the Beis Hamikdash, then you're mehuder, and you will pay almost any price. You'll pay maybe double.
Well, I think a lot of that may depend, which we don't really know, which is how frequently were animals, as they're just raising them in the normal process, how frequently were they valid versus invalid for a korban, just in the moves that they get in the course of being brought up and so on. I mean, the extreme example is the para aduma, where two hairs, and even if it's been somebody put a
Yeah.
package on it one time for 2 seconds, and all of a sudden it's invalid. So there's extremes, and we don't know where this falls exactly.
Right. But you see from the Gemara, though, that the only time you can make that exchange is when you're forced to make the exchange, not
Right.
because, oh, I decided I don't like this animal, I just want to
Correct.
get another one. That
Yeah.
doesn't in any way nullify the kedusha of the animal. You have to bring it. It's only when you're forced to do it, because I no longer can bring an animal for sacrifice that has a mum. That's not right. I can't bring it to the Rebbeinu Shalom. I have to have something that has a certain perfection to it, even if it's less expensive. But I have to have certain criteria, that it has to be without a mum, it has to be this, whatever. So Shmuel pronounces and says, Hegdish shavamana shechilu al shavapruta mechulo. It's completely mechulo, meaning that you can make that exchange. You can make the exchange, and this in the commercial world would be called mekachtos. In the commercial world, you buy something for a mana, and then you exchange it for a pruta, so to speak. That's not valid. That's mekachtos. That's an extreme case of not just a no. It's an extreme case. Yet by hegdish, it's okay. So going back to what we were just saying, so the Manda Omer, which is Rav Yonah, who says that it's speaking about hegdish, that's where Rabbi Yochanan says mekachtos, then a fortiori, almost kal v'chomer, that by karka you would say it. Why? Because hegdish is something that's brought to the Rebbeinu Shalom, and we said this last week. Brought to the Rebbeinu Shalom, and by the Rebbeinu Shalom, there's no mistake. There's no such thing as mekachtos. Oh, Rebbeinu Shalom, sorry, I didn't. Rebbeinu Shalom, there's no such thing. So in a case where there's mekachtos, when there can't even have mekachtos, and yet you say mekachtos, and yet Rabbeinu says it is mekachtos, then certainly something where in the normal course there is this concept of mekachtos, then he includes it. So according to Rabbi Yonah, by saying hegdish, Rabbi Yochanan means hegdish and karka. But if you take Rabbi Yirmiyah's position and you say that Rabbi Yochanan meant when he said mekachtos karka, you can't conclude from that he would include hegdish, because hegdish is a different parasha entirely. In other words, what you can do by karka and say it's mekachtos, you can't say by the Rebbeinu Shalom it's mekachtos. You're using the same argument and flipping it on the other way around and saying if you learn karka, you can't learn hegdish, because hegdish is totally different than karka. By hegdish, you can be totally mekachtos, and there isn't mekachtos. In other words, it can be a pruta, maybe a penny to a dollar, 10 cents to the dollar. So clearly that would be defined as mekachtos, yet it doesn't apply. Why? Because we're talking about karbanos, and to the Rebbeinu Shalom, the whole concept of a mistake. What is a mekachtos? I made a mistake. Okay, I didn't just value it badly. I made a mistake. I sold something that was so totally unfairly priced that we're told in the Torah, you can't do that to somebody. You can't, just because he doesn't know and he's ignorant, you can't sell him a bill of goods that they'll say, oh, this is nice. Yeah, I'm willing to pay it. Okay, again, two people can always come to terms willingly, even though they know it's not the market, but it's an unusual piece, whether it's a piece of jewelry or whatever it happens to be. I'm willing to pay it, even though the price doesn't justify. We're talking about a case where someone doesn't know what the price is, and he says, "Oh, it's $100." Okay, fine, $100. In reality, it's $10. But he's so. In other words, that's because he doesn't know, not because he enters into it voluntarily, knowing what it is, but saying, notwithstanding, I will buy. Two different things. So Shmuel's principle is what but we're now defining as the basis of the machlokes because Shmuel makes that distinction, and he says basically there's no such thing as monetary value. I think you said it, Jay, or that you look at the carbon, and the carbon is a carbon, and now you replace it with another carbon, and that's what the Rebbeinu Shalom will take. The Rebbeinu Shalom is not necessarily interested in how much you paid for it. Okay, he isn't going to judge you because you paid more or less. You're bringing a nice carbon, and it just may happen to be because the market dropped so drastically that there's no supply and demand, that you happen to get a gorgeous or beautiful animal for a pruta. So your luck. Am I going to be penalized because I paid a pruta for an animal that may be totally equivalent in appearance and in every other way to the carbon that I brought? So that's his point. Don't look at the monetary aspect of it. Look at the carbon. The carbon is a nice carbon. That's fine. So Shmuel is the measuring stick for the machlokes here, and so therefore we say, according to Rabbi Yoina, that Rabbi Yochanan means hegdish and karka, and according to Rav Yirmiyah, he means karka but not hegdish because you can't include both. Okay, so that's fine. We've now defined the machlokes. So now, not leaving well enough alone, and say that, wait a minute, Rabbi Yoina says that you learn hegdish, and from hegdish you learn out karka. That's not quite right. Why? And the Gemara is now going to go forward to show that in fact is not Rabbi Yona's view. Now, how could Rabbi Yona say that by saying that it's hegdish, it automatically means karka? So says the Gemara as follows. The non-wholesome we learned is a Mishnah in Tumura talking about karbonos. It says as follows in the Mishnah: in Hoya Kodesh Balmum, and this is what we just talked about in Shmuel's case, where the Kodesh, the holiness of the animal came off because it was a Balmum, and that's the only way that you can exchange, as we said. It has to be a forced reason, not just, oh, I don't like this animal, I want something else. Then, so what happens? Yotzel l'chulin. It becomes chulin. It becomes totally mundane and has a non-sacred status, and it's not kodesh. V'tzarech lasos lo damim. And the Mishnah says that the person who is bringing the carbon has to add money to the new carbon if it isn't the same value. So this is totally opposite of what Shmuel said. That Mishnah there says that if you have a carbon that you're now exchanging because of a mum, sure, you can bring another carbon, but we're going to look at the value of the carbon, exactly what we were talking about before, that we before we said, I mean, and I'm Shmuel, but we raised this question, right? I think Jay said it, and that, okay, what difference does it make? Well, obviously, it makes a difference that if you paid less, somehow the chashivas of the carbon is affected, even though it might be a nice looking animal, and in every other respect, it's the same. But if you got it for a bargain, and you already committed, let's say, to paying a mana for that animal, you have to make up the difference between a pruta and a mana, and then bring the animal. The animal is fine. You can bring the animal. You don't have to go searching for another animal because this one will substitute. But we're not letting you off the hook that you don't have to make up the difference between the two animals. Okay, so that's the Mishnah. In that Mishnah, there's a machlokes amayroim. Okay, just like we had Rabbi Yochanan and we had the machlokes of Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yirmiyah, here too in this Mishnah there is a machlokes. What's the machlokes? Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So the same Rabbi Yochanan said, here's how I interpret the Mishnah. Yotzel l'chulin d'var Torah. The Torah tells us that when you have a mum in a carbon, you must replace it. That's how halacha l'moshe misinai, you got to do it. But that's all you have to do, according to Rabbi Yochanan. But to make up the difference, that what the Mishnah says, we have to make up the difference. Rabbi Yochanan can't argue with the Mishnah. The Mishnah says it. It's only the Rabbanon who said, this doesn't pass. It's not right that you should be able to exchange something worth $100 for something worth $10. It doesn't sit well with them. So the Rabbanon said, and we know this is the case because the Rabbanon oftentimes bring out a chumrah that the Torah does not say. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, this is a chumrah midivreihem that you have to pay. But midoraisa, it's enough to exchange the carbon for another carbon, and you yotzi yidei chavasa, whether it was a chatos, an oila, an asham, or mincha, doesn't matter. Whatever, or just a voluntary carbon that you brought because of karas hatov, whatever it is, that's midivreim. That's all the Torah wants from us. Now, Rish Lakish argues on Rabbi Yochanan, and he often does, and he says, "Af sorech lasus le'damim min haTorah." He said, "No, the exchange is one thing. But the damim, the money, is also min haTorah. In other words, the Torah is saying you have to make an exchange. Okay, so it's not clear from the language what he means. So this machlokes is really based on the lashon in the Torah, and the lashon of the Torah is that the Torah uses, when it says to make an exchange, it says erkacha. Erkacha, the way we understand it, means value. On its face, it means value. So if you say that the value is in the looking at what you paid, then you could argue, like Rish Lakish, that the Torah means, yes, you paid less, it's not the same value. You have to pay what the value is. Okay, so if the carbon was a mana, you've got to pay a mana for the substitute. You don't pay a mana, then you still have to make up the difference. In other words, you have to give the gizbar of Hegdish, the treasurer, you have to give him the difference between a pruta and a mana. That's how Rav Lakish looks at it. Rabbi Yochanan, on the other hand, takes the word erkacha and has a different meaning, because you can interpret erkacha mean value, that you see what its value is in the marketplace, and what its value means in the marketplace is that's what it is. Okay, so it's now a mana, fine, it's a mana. So when I go out and get another animal, that appraisal that applies to that animal, it applies to that animal. It doesn't have an effect, does not have an effect min haTorah on the replacement animal, because what you're doing is you're comparing the two animals, and it's not the domim that you spent to buy it, because erkacha doesn't mean domim. It means value, appraised value. If it means appraised value, then midaraisa, you no longer have to pay the difference, because I'm going to accept that that's the value of the animal, and I find another animal. So to me, the animal is what is the carbon. The animal is what is we're really looking at comparison, not the underlying value of the animal. Therefore, midrabanan, they come along and say, no, that's not acceptable, because you got it for so much less money. It's kind of like it offends the senses. Why should you pay so much less for the carbon that you bought? Okay, you have a windfall, so make the Gizber of Hektish make it up to him. But Rabbi Yochanan says no, you don't have to make it up to him. But the min haTorah, but min Rabbanan, you have to make it up to him, because the rabbis sort of felt that it wasn't right that you were paying so much less, so they were more, how we shall say it, what will people say? Manoima. What will people say? Well, we bought a carbon for so cheap, and that's what he's bringing to the Rebbeinu Shalom. It's not right. So the Rabbanan were coming to sort of lift up the not because you slighted the Rebbeinu Shalom, because you slighted the everybody else, and everybody else looks at this and says, "How is this right? That you're going to spend $10 for $100?" So it offended the senses, and that's why the Rabbanan came along and said, "No, we can't allow it." So if that's the machlekes from the word erkecha, then it makes sense that Rabbi Yochanan says erkecha min Torah for sure, mid Rabbanan, and therefore he says you don't have to. You don't have to make an exchange, pay anything more. What happened later is the Rabbanan said you have to do it. But Rish Lakish, who says that Minat Torah, because he looks at values, so really it's the question that we've been discussing here before, does it matter if you get something for less money, but sort of comparable to the same amount? Does it really matter? Why should it matter? You're bringing the same carbon Hashem. Hashem is getting the benefit of the beautiful carbon that you brought. What difference is it whether you paid a little bit more or paid a little bit less? That's when this question of Erica comes in. Yeah.
So I'm missing something here, because when we start this story, the Balabas, he said, he in his head, and since the Ribono Shalom knows what's in your head,
right,
he says, I want to bring a carbon for this reason, or I have to. I'm going to spend a certain amount of money. I go to the animal marketplace, and I'm looking for a $100, like a $100 esrog. I don't want a 50. I'm only looking for 100. And he finds the beautiful one. So already he's made a commitment to Hashem, because this whole story is really man to God. It's not man to the intermediary. Is the cashier at the base of Migdash, but right, it's between him and Hashem. And he automatically, you would say, his intentions need to still be carried out, which means he has to go buy another animal at the mana price, even though he bought one that turned out to have a mun. The original mission shouldn't get canceled or diverted or have all kinds of machlokas about different ways in and out of the whole thing. The basic mission should be carried out, and that's what the Rabbanan should say automatically. You have to go replace the animal that had a mum with the value that you started all with. You bought $100 esrog, whatever. But it's a pretty simple thing in my mind. The mission from the Balabas should be carried through all the way to the end. Whatever.
So what are you saying?
He has to replace.
Or Shlakish?
No, he has to replace another carbon of the same value that he started the whole process. There should be no machlokus about that, because the whole deal is between him and Hashem through the base of Mikdash.
So let me ask you a question. I bring a carbon. It's a beautiful carbon. I spend $100 for the animal, whether it was too much or too little. But I found the perfect animal to bring eventually, and therefore I'm proud to bring this animal to the base of Mikdash. Unfortunately, it gets a mum. Now I can no longer bring that animal to the base of Mikdash. So when you bring the substitute animal, is the Rabbi Shalom kaviyachol? I mean, this is obviously what is it that the Rabbi Shalom wants from you? You're bringing a carbon. He wants you to bring the carbon, and let's say that beauty matters. In other words, it's a beautiful carbon. What was, again, I think we touched on this last week. I said, what was the Bunchum's Taina to Kayin over Hevel? Hevel went out of his way to bring from the best of the best of the best. And Kayin said, this is okay. I'll bring this animal. It's good enough. So the Rabbi Shalom took Hevel's carbon and not Kayin's, because Kayin didn't exert himself to the point where he wanted to bring the best to the Rabbi Shalom. Okay, so that's kind of like up there as the benchmark. Now, if you're going to bring a carbon to the Bava Metzia, you're going to ask yourself, is the Bava Metzia, the Bava Metzia going to mind, or will it matter how much I spent, or did I get a beautiful carbon that was befits coming to the Beis Hamikdash? I
It's
think
the
we would be
same.
hard pressed. I
The
think we would
money
be
and
hard pressed to say that maybe for your neighbor who looks over your shoulder, you spent $100 and he was cheap and he got a replacement for $10. But that's not the Rabbi Shalom. The Rabbi Shalom, does the Rabbi Shalom really care? I mean, Kaviyachal in a bigger sense. Does he really care that you spent less for the same quality? You were
I think
fortunate to
it's
get
an
a
insult.
beautiful carbon, which is what you wanted, and you got a beautiful carbon, but it turns out, for whatever reason, supply, demand, whatever the reason, you paid less for it. That's the underlying question of whether the Torah says that the Rabbanu Shalom actually minds, and you have to do it with the same dollar amount. Now, let me ask you a different question. Let's say the supply and demand was such that I had to pay $100 a month, and I got an inferior product because there wasn't beautiful product. Am I now supposed to spend $200 and get something that was
No, that,
equivalent to the first one because I didn't get it nice enough? How would you respond to that?
the point is the original mission was to bring a very nice Corbin, and he paid what it cost.
No, but the cost may be an afterthought here. That's really the
No,
machlokes.
but I don't think it's the afterthought. I'm saying he starts off with both. He says, I need to bring, or I want to bring a Corbin, and I know the nicest one cost $100. So he made a decision. I'm spending $100 on a very nice Corbin.
But there
Now,
may have been a more expensive carbon for 200, but he didn't buy it. He bought the
he
100.
made a choice of $100 Corbin that's very nice in his
Right,
standard. Now,
right.
if the mission gets disturbed because of a moon, he still has to do the same thing again in order to complete the mission that he already made a commitment in his head to Hashem. I'm going to bring a very nice Corbin. They cost $100 these days. That's all I need to do to complete the mission. Otherwise, the mission gets all messed up with all of these are.
Okay, so tell me this. If he goes and gets a replacement and the market is so supply and demand that he can no longer buy this beautiful carbon for a mana, he has to pay 2 mana for the same thing that he originally got for a mana.
I would say he'd have to pay.
Are we going to require him to spend 2 mana for the same carbon that he brought before?
He should want to spend the money because he decided ahead of time that I want the beautiful carbon, and the cost is not his main object. He doesn't start off the morning saying, I'm going to bring $100 carbon.
Right.
And
Oh, so you're making a point here. You're making a point that if I didn't make a Yehiratz and I'm going to spend a mana for a carbon, so if he's fortunate enough to find a beautiful carbon and it costs him a pruta instead of a mana, that he's still fulfilling his obligations to Rabbi Shalom because he's bringing this beautiful carbon. And we're
right.
not worried about the money, and that's the machlokes. The machlokes is, how do you interpret the word erkacha? Is it erkacha part of the carbon that if you're saying it means the amount of money, erkacha meaning the amount of money, then the fact that you paid only a pruta offends me. It offends me that you only spent a pruta for that.
No, when he started the mission that morning,
Yeah,
he knew it's going to cost me $100 to buy that beautiful carbon that I wanted to bring. So if something happens on the way, he says my mission isn't completed, I still need to buy a beautiful carbon. I don't care what the price is.
So if the price is only a pruta, does he get away with it, or does he have to pay the gizber, the differential?
No. Once he finds a direct replacement, which is really he's saying, I want the beautiful carbon, is the mission. Right? So if he needs to spend more to make the replacement or spend less, it shouldn't matter. His mission is the carbon.
You're 100% right,
carbon. That's all.
No, okay, you're 100% right, and that's the part. What?
Here's another way to look at it, though. There's three
Yeah.
ways to define a korban or any other, donation of an object. Okay. One is the baseline definition of an object, a sheep of a certain age or whatever. Okay. Second is based on the value of the object, a mana, a pruta, etc. And the third is on the subjective value of it in terms of subjective quality, because uh, all these things, yes, there are differences of size and this and that, but it's all really, in the end, very subjective, and it really only boils down to two things. Yeah, there isn't any definition to say this is a grade A korban, a grade B korban, a grade C korban. The marketplace will look at that and then come up and then say, okay, this one's $100 and this one's $50. But basically, in the end, it's either a very baseline thing of it's XYZ, it's like buying a car. There's all kinds of different quality, which does up affecting the price. But in the end, it's this model of this year, and this mileage, let's say, very, very few parameters, or it's this is what the market value is for it. And so when it comes to the replacement, it's hard to say subjective. I might look at it and say, oh, this one's just as beautiful as that one. And somebody else might say, I don't like the way the eyes are too close together, or the eyes are too far apart, or this or that. To me, it's worth more, or it's worth less, or it's not as good, or it's better. And so you end up with
Yeah, so
market value being
I
the
agree.
termination.
I agree with that. But when you go, let's go back to the Esrog and Lulav. When you start out in the morning going to the Esrog marketplace, which you do in Eretz Yisrael because you don't order it from a shul in Eretz Yisrael, people go directly. And you start in your head, do you have the idea of, I want the most beautiful esrig as long as it's affordable? Or do you say, I'm going out to buy a $50 esrig? I hope I get the nicest one for $50. The answer should be, he's as a heater mitzvah, I'm looking to get the beauty of the esrig, and whatever it costs to cost. So if he starts off the morning, I want to give a certain beautiful quality of a korban. That's his mission all the way through.
Yeah, but using the esrog as an example, there are some people, they're millionaires, and they're just going to buy the top of the line esrog, whether it's $50, $100, $1,000. They're going to get whatever's the top, and that's it. But most people, they're going to go in and they're going to say, you know what? I got all these expenses for sukkahs. I gotta buy skach, and I gotta buy food, and I gotta do this, and I gotta do that. So I'm going to allocate $50 or
Right,
$100 or
right.
$500 for my
But
lulav and
that
esrog.
isn't what happened here with the korban. He didn't say, I have a mana in my pocket and I'm going to go buy the nicest
We
korban.
don't know that. What we know is that he bought a korban worth of mana. We don't know whether that's because he had in his mind, you know what, I want to give a nice donation. I'd like to do it as a korban this time. I've got a
Okay.
mana to spare,
Well,
and that's
that's,
what I'm going to
since
do.
we
No,
don't know what
I
was in
don't
his
think
mind.
Right.
I don't think that the Gemara is considering the motive of why he spent a mana for that. I mean, to your point, Menashe, which is a good point, the Gemara isn't saying that if I had more money, I'd spend more, or I'm doing it because this is my budget. The Gemara is not getting into that. The Gemara is saying simply, he went out, he saw a nice animal, was worth a mana. Obviously, he could pay a mana, and he paid the mana. Now, if he had seen a nicer animal, it was two mana, would he have bought it? It's
You
not as
don't know.
material, because now you're going into the subjectivity of what you just said. Maybe I can afford two mana. Maybe I can't afford two mana. The Torah isn't telling us you have to do something and find the nicest of the nicest of the nicest, regardless of the cost. No, not at all. There are people who are millionaires and they can afford the nicest korban or the nicest lulav and esrog, and they'll pay $1,000 for what you'll pay $80, and you'll have a beautiful esrog and he'll have a beautiful esrog. So the motive is less important than the fact that by making the decision to spend the money, he has made a declaratory statement. I am paying a mana. This is what I can afford. This is what I like.
But
I am paying a mana for this animal. Motive, forget about. Forget
except
about
that
motive.
this is a negotiation between a man and Hashem.
Right.
It's not between the
And
man
Hashem is
and
willing
the
to makabel, but Hashem is willing to makabel a carbon from an ani, and an ani can barely afford to scrape together a couple of prutas. And yet the Baruch Shalom accepts
matter.
the
It's
carbon.
a one. It's not me versus all the other people in the town.
Right.
My mission is I want to do something directly for Hashem. I do it through the Beis Hamikdash, through a korban, because either I want to bring a korban, or I have to bring a korban. The mission is getting distorted with all these calculations of whether or not something goes wrong in the mission. How do you start deciding what to do? Replace it with anything, or replace it with what the mission was?
But that's
But since
reality in life.
we don't know what was in his head that morning. We don't know if he says, I'm going to go out, I'm going to spend $100. All right. I'm going to go buy the nicest animal for $100. If something happens, he'll say, I have to go spend another $100
Right.
to complete the mission.
Right.
Rabbi, didn't we learn that if you designate a specific animal for sacrifice and the animal got a mum, you don't owe the animal anymore. But if you just said, I'm going to bring an animal, you do owe the animal. So it doesn't sound like God is interested in the mission straight through all the way. Only if you said, I'm bringing an animal, I got to bring an animal. I got to replace it if it has a mum. If you designated this particular animal A, and it developed a mum, you don't owe the animal anymore.
No, but you still have to bring a carbon. You don't, not this animal, but you have to substitute it with another animal for a carbon. You can't say it was this or nothing. You can't say, oh, I'm giving this animal, and if something happens to it, I no longer have to give an animal.
Even if it was a nadava?
Say?
Even if it was a voluntary offering?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course. So in other words, a davar shebekadusha already puts you in sort of in the mood. But think of this: the Rebbeinu Shalom is Yodea Machshavos. The Rebbeinu Shalom knows better than you or I or anybody else what's in the mind of the giver. In other words, he went out with the purest of motives and he found a beautiful animal that cost a money. If he had not found that animal and found an animal for 2 mana, he would have spent 2 mana. But he happens to find a beautiful animal for a mana. So that's Yodea Machshavos. That's what the Rebbeinu Shalom is willing to accept. However, if he's miserly and he says, I'm not looking, I just want to pay a couple of pruta. I don't want to pay more than a pruta for an animal. And he goes out and finds an animal for a pruta. Okay, the Rebbeinu Shalom, we may not know, but the Rebbeinu Shalom will know. So the only question here becomes if his intention was pure and he spent a mana, regardless, Jay, of whether that mana was high-priced or low-priced or right in the middle, that's what he spent, okay? Let's not dissect that anymore. And misfortune befalls him that the carbon gets a mum. Now, he had pledged the carbon, so he's got to bring a carbon to Hashem. So then now we have this machlokes as to whether or not he has to. So we've already bridged the gap, and we said in the beginning, we said he doesn't like Shmuel. This version doesn't agree with Shmuel. This version says, no, you can't just bring a carbon even for a pruta. You've got to replace the value. But the question now becomes in this machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, is the replacement midoraisa or midrabanan? But we've already jumped ahead from our original understanding of the Gemara according to Shmuel, that an exchange between a mana and a pruta is okay because you're just bringing a carbon. And we're saying, no, Shmuel is not correct. The correct answer is, of course, you have to make it up to the Gizbar of Hagdish. The question is it because the Torah tells us to? Or is it because the Torah tells us, no, fine. In other words, Shmuel's right. But comes the Rabbanan and they say, no, we can't accept this. First of all, what will it look like if somebody hears, oh, he replaced the beautiful carbon of a mana for a pruta? It'll cheapen, again, and we're thinking through this. it'll cheapen the value of the carbon because he only spent a pruta. So that's the substance of the machlokes now, is whether or not he has to make it up to the Ribono Shel Olam or not. And the Torah says no. The Chachamim then add yes. And according to Rish Lakish, the Torah says you have to do that because he interprets the word erkecha in a different way. And to him, erkecha means the money. And so therefore, by definition, the money matters. By definition, the money matters. If the money matters and he only spent a pruta, then okay, he brought the carbon for a pruta, but you still have to give the other prutas up to a mana to the gizber so that the hekdesh is not losing. I think we can go far afield and sort of contemplate what's right and what's wrong. And Jay, there's nothing wrong when you're taking either the view of Rabbi Yochanan or Rish Lakish, because one of them may be more appealing. But now we're saying at the end of the day that the Torah is what the Torah required. And again, like everything else, we have to find a source, and we find the word in the Torah that says erkecha, right? That you have to give the value. So what does that mean? Does it mean money or not money? What does erkecha mean? So that's the substance of the machlokes between Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, but they're rejecting Shmuel. They're rejecting Shmuel's view, who said that if you're mechalel for a pruta, then mechulo. It's already mechulo. And they're saying, no, it's not mechulo. It's not just automatically mechulo. You go ahead and get a substitute, but now you have to give the difference back to hekdesh. So, Jay, we're one step ahead of it. We're saying you do have to pay. You do have to pay. But why? Under what circumstance? The one says midaraisa, the one says no, the Torah doesn't require that, it's midrabanan. So I think that's kind of how we have to look at it. And we can debate what's the real underlying value here. Is it the appearance of the carbon, the fact that the carbon looks beautiful, or is it the amount of money you spent? And again, a lot of this is very subjective, as we said before, because someone can spend 2 mana, 5 mana for a carbon. So, the sky's the limit if you can afford it. And will he get a better animal? I don't know. I mean, you go to shul on Sukkot and you look at esrogim, they're all, of course, kosher, beautiful. Some are nicer than others, but I'd be hard pressed. And I've seen the Shuk in Eretz Yisrael. I know I've seen the New York market. Okay, the Silver Spring market. You look at a beautiful esrig. This esrig may be in another state or in another market, might be 5 times what I paid for it. I paid a nice price, but is it the be all and end all of prices? No. Someone else can get the same esrig and sits next to me in shul. He's paid 5 times the amount. So that's really where price becomes sort of secondary to the actual giving of the carbon. But says this, the interpretation of this Mishnah and Tamura, money matters, but does it matter really minat Torah or not? And that's where the source of the machlokes is. Yeah. Definitely you have to pay the difference. But is it midaraisa that you pay the difference? Or is it only midrabanan who say that, yeah, it's not right. You bought something, you already spent that amount of money. Okay, make the base and make the whole. Make him whole, pay the difference. So remember, he's now paying twice as much because he already spent the money on an animal that he now has to shecht, and if he shechts it, it may be worth only a quarter.
Right, it might be 90% or it might be 10%. We don't know.
Exactly right. So, but the basic mikdash doesn't really look into what he did. Okay, so he did the best he could. If you hold that it's midaraisa, then Rish Lakish is really saying, you know what? You need to make that up, because otherwise it's a slight to the Ribono Shel Olam, is that you're getting an animal, albeit equal in appearance and heat or whatever, but you're paying a fraction of the price. That doesn't pass. It's a pasnish because the Torah says erkecha, that the value matters, and that's really, I think, the substance of this machlokes. So again, we can debate this and discuss it, but let's go a little bit further. So the Gemara says b'maya skinim. Okay, so we just discussed the machlokes of Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. What are we talking about? Okay, so now we have to break it down. If you're going to tell me that this whole discussion is about ono, that the value of the new carbon is one, in other words, we're talking about 1/6. The value between the two carbonos are 1/6, because that's the definition of ono. Strike the Gemara, Bahai Lamer Rosh Lakish Tzarch Lasos Lodam Divrei Torah. Would Rosh Lakish say that for 1/6, it's a small amount, for 1/6, the Torah is going to require him? In other words, is the Torah really going to come down hard on him for a 6th? It can't be. Why? For Hatanan, we learned in our Mishnah, in other words, we're going to go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says there is no by Hegdish. What is Hegdish? Bringing a carbon to the Rabbanu Shalom. So by the very definition of this Mishnah, no doesn't matter to the Rabbanu Shalom. If it's a question of 1/6, it doesn't matter. How can you, Rav Shlokish, say that it's min haTorah that you have to do this? It's exactly opposite to what we just learned in the Mishnah, and you're going to come along and say, I don't agree with, first of all, it's an Amora, but if the Mishnah interprets it as saying Ein Lohem no, and if we're going to say that this machloikis between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish is about ono, that can't be, right? Eladrom shelam ono, and we say kakos v'avodim rishdoris hegdish. So it can't be. Elomai bittul mekah. So we have to be talking about bittul mekah. And the reason why the Gemara goes through this whole thing is because the Gemara wants to show, as I said before, that Rav Yonah, there's a contradiction in Rav Yonah. Rav Yonah is the one who said Rabbi Yochanan is talking about hegdish, not karka, and the Gemara now wants to show that that can't be. Why can't it be? Because we can't be talking about ono. Ella bittul mekah. We're talking about a case of mekach tos where he was totally off base. Now we're going to flip around. In such a case where you're talking about bittul mekach, would Rabbi Yochanan say that you only have to pay it midrabanan? Of course he would. Gemara is asking. Would he say it's only midrabanan, not midoraisa? If we're talking about bittul mekach, of which there's no constraint. Oh no, we say there's a constraint because the Mishnah says you can't, no doesn't apply. But if we're saying that bittul mekach is different than I know, and bittul mekach applies to all of these 4 categories, then why would Rabbi Yochanan say it's only midrabanan? Why wouldn't he agree with Rish Lakish that since bittul mekach can apply here? And if bittul mekach can apply it the right way. The Torah says that you shouldn't do this, and you've done it, fine, pay the difference. So, in other words, depending on what you're actually talking about, there's a kasha either on Rish Lakish or Rabbi Yochanan. So we dismissed it that it can't be oino, therefore there's no kasha on Rish Lakish. But Rabbi Yochanan, why would Rabbi Yochanan say it's only midivrayim, only from the Rabbanan, that you pay the difference and not midoraisa? Okay, so that's the way the Gemara is trying to present it. Rabbi Yirmiyah Oma, v'ha'oma Rabbi Yonah ahegdish Rabbi Yirmiyah Oma akakos. But wait a minute. Okay, you want to superimpose this discussion on the machlokes between Rabbi Yonah and Rabbi Yirmiyah. Here we're talking about Rabbi Yochanan and Shlakish. Now we want to look at in Rabbi Yochanan the machlokes between Rabbi Yonah and Rabbi Yirmiyah. V'ha'omar Rabbi Yonah hegdish. Rabbi Yonah said that Rabbi Yochanan is only talking about hegdish. It's Rabbi Yirmiyah who says that he's talking about karka. So if that's the case, the Trovaya Mishnei Rabbi Yochanan, and they both agreed in Rabbi Yochanan ono ein lohem, that there's no ono by karka and by hegdish, but bittul mekach yesh lohem. But there is bittul mekach. So if there's bittul mekach, now you have a stira with what Rabbi Yonah says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan himself in arguing with Rish Lakish. You can't have it both ways, Because in one case he's saying that it's not min Torah. Rabbi Yochanan says it's not min Torah, and therefore you don't have to worry about it. And yet in our Gemara we're saying, wait a minute, we're talking about bittul mekach, and bittul mekach, then of course he has to repay. So in other words, he has to pay damin. So in Rabbi Yona's interpretation, how could Rabbi Yonah interpret Rabbi Yochanan one way, and Rabbi Yochanan says in the Mishnah over there another thing? In our Gemara, Rabbi Yonah is saying you got to pay, and in the Mishnah Tamura, you don't got to pay. So in other words, he's saying it's a stira. How do you understand Rabbi Yonah in Rabbi Yochanan? Because Rabbi Yochanan made the definitive statement on the Mishnah Tamura that you don't have to pay midoraisa. Yeah, the Rabbanan, but we're not talking about the Rabbanan now. We're talking about halacha. That if the Torah says, in other words, the Torah halacha, not the Rabbanan. If the Torah says you don't have to pay, you don't have to pay. But wait a minute. Rabbi Yonah said in Rabbi Yochanan, you do have to pay by bittul mekach. So this is the Gemara's puzzlement on understanding Rabbi Yonah. And so how do we understand it? How do we understand it? So we'll just finish up with an answer that many will find less satisfying because it doesn't really answer the question. What's the answer? What does the Gemara say? Bittul mekach. You're right. We're talking about bittul mekach, not ono. Flip around. Who says what in that Mishnah? What does it mean? What Rav Yochanan said is really Rav Shlokish speaking, and what Rav Shlokish says is Rav Yochanan speaking. So if you take that tack, then Rav Yochanan is agreeing with what Rav Shlokish said before, that it's midoraisa. It is midoraisa. If it is midoraisa, then there's no stira with Rav Yonah. Rav Yonah's interpretation is that bittul mekach, you have to pay. And Rabbi Yochanan in the Mishnah says, midaraisa, you have to pay, because he's now adopting what we know to be Rish Lakish's view. So the Gemara is trying to say, in order to straighten it all out, you've got to flip what they said. Oh, we didn't really understand. Rabbi Yochanan meant, like Rish Lakish says, that it's midaraisa, and Rish Lakish says it's midarabana. So let's just, the Apech Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish, V'darish Rabbi Yochanan, you have to flip them around. So if you flip them around, there's no more kasha, because now it's consistent that Rabbi Yochanan says it's midoraisa. You have to pay midoraisa, and Rabbi Yonah and Rabbi Yochanan says, yeah, of course you have to pay, because only a Noah is exempt, but bittul mekach is not exempt. So again, it's the Gemara, and it's Kaidish Kadashim. We can't I don't want to color it in any other way. But the Gemara does this from time to time in order to sort of reconcile, because we're not going to say Rabbi Yonah is wrong. We don't want to chas v'shalom say Rabbi Yonah is wrong, but he would be wrong here if that was the case. So we can't say that. Therefore, we say that he's not wrong. But we didn't have it right. The Rabbi Yochanan really is saying that it's midaraisa. All right, so that ends the sugya, which we'll stop here. We'll go over the Rashis next week. The Gemara goes through here. But again, we had a very robust conversation in this whole discussion, because it isn't, I don't want to oversimplify it. There really is a svara, and Jay, if you adopt the svara of one side, then yeah, you're advocating that either that money should matter or money shouldn't matter. And again, depending on how you interpret the word erkecha, it's not clear. We're not going to say teku, but you have two balei machloikis who say that the Bnei Shalom doesn't matter. The money doesn't matter to the Bnei Shalom as long as you bring a beautiful carbon. And the flip side is that the Beis Hamikdash deserves to get what you committed. You committed a mana. And so the Beis Hamikdash deserves a mana. The fact that you bought it for a pruta somehow doesn't sit right with the Gizber Hegdish, and therefore you have to make up the difference. But anyway, it's a fascinating machlokes, and but at least we rectified, for better or for worse, we rectified Rabbi Yonah that there's no steer in Rabbi Yonah because Rabbi Yochanan is consistent that it's the Raisa that you have to pay. It's only Rosh Lakish, and again, the halacha between Rabbi Yochanan and Rosh Lakish is usually like Rabbi Yochanan because he was the senior, he was the Gadol Hador, he was the senior. But but his Baal Machlekes still has, it resonates with the Rosh Lakish says, certainly matters. It's just that you take sides, and you either hold like Rabbi Yochanan or you hold like Rosh Lakish.
Okay.
All right. So
Thank you.
contemplate that mitzvah. Oh, so one other thing. Next week, I'm actually not available because I'm going to my grandson's bar mitzvah on Shabbos and Sunday. So I think Sunday morning I probably wouldn't be available. So maybe we'll pick it up mitzvah in 2 weeks.
2 weeks. Thank you,
Okay,
Rabbi.
Menashe, you'll let people know.
Yeah, Mazel tov.